Hello and welcome to the Paddock Pass podcast, brought to you by Renthal Street. Check out renthal.com and the Fit My Bike tool for all the parts available for your make, model and year of motorcycle. On today's podcast, we're going to look back to the Indonesian Grand Prix that's just finished. And I have to say, I'm delighted to be back on the podcast because I get the chance to chat to David and Neil about this weekend's MotoGP action. Adam has decided, Neil, that QPR are into the top six of the championship, so that's it. He's done until QPR drop out of playoff contention. I'm in as a sub, but you won't want to talk too much about football, Neil, after this weekend.
I'm just delighted that we can show the world, Steve, that we're actually not at loggerheads. We are still actually friends, despite our ongoing rivalry in the Paddock Pass Podcast Fantasy League.
I fucking hate your guts, Neil, after this weekend, as I'm sure we'll get to when we break down the Alpine Stars Paddock Pass Podcast Fantasy League. But at the end of the day, I can be great friends with David at all times because, David, your fantasy team is almost as bad as Adam's.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I mean, the only thing that we can't be friends about is the fact that you would insist on playing golf as if it's a perfectly normal thing to do.
It's just to get my steps in. That's all it is. But Dave, obviously your powers of prediction were really good on the Paddock Notes shows this week. But what about our Patreon backers? Who's top of the charts for Patreon predictions this week? Because every week on patreon.com/Paddock Pass Podcast, we'll run a little predictions contest for all of our supporters.
Well, a lot of people should have gotten the prediction right because a lot of people said that Marco Bezzecchi was going to clean up, but Marco Bezzecchi did not clean up. The only person who correctly predicted that Fermin Aldeguer would win the Indonesian GP at Mandalika was TV Room Raccoon. She also got the top Ducati finisher right because, Fermin's on a Ducati. Shout out to DJ Purchase and Craig Stanion as well because they also predicted that Fermin would be the best Ducati rider, but they were less optimistic about his finishes. And there were two people who got the correct numbers of finishes right. People were incredibly optimistic about the number of people who would actually finish this race, but two people correctly said that only 14 riders would cross the line: Daksha and Adam Cole.
Oh, very good. So we ended up with quite a bit of variety there, and luckily, as a reward for Craig and for Daksha and for TV Room Raccoon, we've got a few of their questions as well throughout the course of the show. But Neil, we'll come to you first and foremost for your moment of the weekend.
Well, my moment came very early into Sunday's race, Steve. It was the first lap. Marco Bezzecchi had got another terrible start, just as he did in the sprint, and appeared to be trying to make his way forward through the most unlikeliest of places, and suddenly found himself caught up behind Marc Marquez. Almost seemed to be a little surprised by just how fast he was through that first section of track, and then tagged into Marquez's rear, taking them both down, sending them both off and into the gravel. And Mark obviously had a big old tumble, has done some damage to his right collarbone. Bezzecchi is severely beaten up after, he sort of dismounted at well over 100 miles an hour, it seemed. And from that moment, the super strong pre-race favourite was out. And we had the very strange feeling that this was completely wide open.
I think there's a small chance we're going to talk a little bit more about this moment later on in the pod. But Dave, what about your favourite moment of the weekend, or standout moment of the weekend, shall I say?
My moment of the weekend was Pecco Bagnaia crashing out of last place during Sunday's race, which just about summed up his entire weekend. He crashed because he decided that he was too far behind Somkiat Chandra and tried to catch him. And that is not the position you want to be in as a double world champion. But yeah, it just summed the whole thing up.
Triple world champion.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, yes, triple world champion, a three-time world champion and double MotoGP champion. But I mean, he is better than this. He should be better than this. He just had an absolutely dismal weekend. I actually sort of because I was watching his timing, and I could see him sort of all of a sudden his lap times were faster than Chantra's, and then all of a sudden he was down at turn 15, 16, that final sort of corner. So yeah, it really sums up an absolutely dismal weekend for Bagnaia.
I think for me, I'm going to mix those two moments together, basically, and have it when Ducati sent out that text message into their WhatsApp group about winning the Dream Team Championship this year, because it literally couldn't have come at a worse time when you've got Pecco Bagnaia ready to hang himself. Marc obviously having the toughest weekend he's had up to that point in the season as well. But I just thought that just the sheer timing of how positive Ducati were about winning the team's championship as their team fell apart was, for me, my big moment of the weekend. It was a toss-up, though, because I was tempted to go with Fermin Aldeguer for winning. So we'll move swiftly on to Fermin, because it was a great win to come through like he did in today's Grand Prix. And for me, I thought it was cool, Neil, and you'll have this as well from, obviously, your time being a Moto2 commentator. When you see a rider come into the paddock like Fermin did, I saw him in Junior GP when he was in stock 600 and then onto a Moto2 bike. And when you see a rider that's come into the paddock and made such an immediate impact, it's great to see them come good in MotoGP as well and get that race victory.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it wasn't necessarily a massive surprise after what we saw through the rest of the weekend. I think all season long, Fermin and his crew chief, Frankie Carcetti, have been saying if only we could sort of hit the ground running on Friday, then we would be a serious prospect. But it's like they're always kind of on the back foot. They're always playing catch up. They've always essentially lost one day because Fermin is obviously adapting to riding a MotoGP machine at a track for the first time. And from Friday, he was immediately strong. He was, I think, inside the top 2 or 3 positions for most of Friday afternoon's practice session. And from then you thought, okay, I think this could actually be a really strong performance over the weekend. But I didn't think it would be quite this strong. And, maybe he got slightly lucky that Marco Bezzecchi decided to self-implode on that first lap. But
maybe.
Yeah, maybe. But still, he was there. And once he got past Acosta, I mean, he was just absolutely away and on a completely different level. I mean, it's a pretty historic moment to become the second youngest winner in Premier Class history at just 20 years and 183 days. I mean, that's even younger than Freddie Spencer. You're looking at that list of youngest ever riders to win in the Premier Class, and you're looking at some all-time greats, maybe with the exception of Norifumi Abe, who still is inside the top 4, I think, on that particular list. I mean, it's pretty crazy that he has had this kind of impact. I wasn't expecting him to be this strong in MotoGP, especially considering some of the struggles that he had last year in Moto2. Almost quite funny that even on such what we're calling a disastrous weekend for Ducati, they still end up winning the race. So pretty impressive stuff from me.
Is Aldeguer more Spencer or more Abe?
It's an early one to call, Dave.
I think the one thing for me is I just can't really see anyone being as inconsistent as a 90s 500 Grand Prix rider, because now the championship is so different. Everything is so close that back in the 90s, we did have so many riders that were hot and cold. They could be the best rider in the world at one track, and then you wouldn't really see them again for the rest of the season. Now, with the way that the bikes are and how level the field is, that can still happen, but it's not because you're nowhere. It's just because you're those couple of tenths of a second back, whereas back in the 90s, you could be 30 seconds back and still finishing on the podium. So I think for me, Fermin is kind of typical of a lot of riders in the modern era, that if you're on the right bike, you're going to look like a superstar half the time. And if you're on the wrong bike, you're going to look mostly irrelevant for a good chunk of the season. So I think that as much as I'd love to be able to say Fermin, this is going to be the first of many, it could be the only time we see it as well. And I think that's the challenge of MotoGP now as well right now.
I think that's a bit harsh. I do think that Fermin is, I think he's properly good. I don't think he's Marc Marquez good. I don't think he's Pedro Acosta good.
I'll say it, Dave,
but he's very good.
More, as in, I don't mean that as a Fermin comment. I mean that about riders in general comment right now, because I think it's so difficult to be able to pick out those riders and say that's the next superstar because of just how tricky it is in the championship now and how bike dependent it is.
And also, it's also about tyres as well, because, in the 90s and sort of up until basically we got the spec tyre, it was the tyre manufacturers who decided who was going to win. It was the tyre manufacturers who decided who was going to get the good tyres. And there were tracks where a particular brand of tyre worked really well, or a particular brand of tyre didn't work really well. So it was much more random. And also, I think there were more wild cards in the sense of like Japanese riders at Suzuka or whatever. And there's far fewer. The wild cards that we have now are all factory test riders. They're not just sort of some random bloke who's really fast in his local championship, because no one else is riding MotoGP bikes.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And Dave, kind of leads us into a question. You mentioned that Craig was one of our Patreon predictors of the week, and Craig's reward for his success was to be able to ask the first question on today's pod. And it's kind of a follow-on to what you've asked there, Dave. Is Fermin the real deal, or was this a victory of circumstances? Or Neil, just to extend the question, can it be both?
It was circumstances. That doesn't mean that Fermin isn't the real deal. Fermin profited optimally from the circumstances. This was a really, really weird weekend, which we shall get into later on. Bezzecchi was faster than everyone. It's just that he was getting terrible starts. I think that Bezzecchi would have beaten. I think Fermin would have been the only person in the on the same continent as Bezzecchi, but because Bezzecchi was that much faster than everyone else, as we saw in the sprint race. But I do think that Bezzecchi would have had the measure of Aldeguer. But the fact that Aldeguer can be that good is really impressive, and it's not the first time. We've seen him before. He's been close to. I think he's had sprint podiums before. He's been very close. He's been very strong. He's had a very impressive rookie season. He's not had a blow the doors off it kind of a rookie season, but he has just been really, really solid, really impressive. And he's going to be a bit of a pain next year for a lot of riders.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, he was on the podium in Le Mans. He was on the podium in Austria as well. Pushed Marc super strong in the last couple of laps of the Austrian Grand Prix. So it's not like this is a complete bolt from the blue. And yeah, like just we know that he's a rider that is very strong in sort of like fast and flowing tracks where you can carry a lot of corner speed. He was able to do that throughout this weekend. Alex Marquez was saying on Saturday that one of the kind of benefits of the setup that Fermin uses is that it's kind of always, we know that Frankie Farchetti always likes to give his rider a bike that is strong towards the end of the race and is able to deal with low amounts of grip. And the fact that we had such hot conditions here this weekend and the grip was pretty low, that seemed to also play into Fermin's hands. So yeah, it was fortunate in a way, but I do think that it's been coming. And after his podium in Austria, I did speak to the Gresini team, and they were very much of the opinion that a win was possible this year. So yeah, I think it's slightly fortunate, but also not a total bolt from the blue.
I want to ask you both a question as well, just about Fermin and where he stacks up, because when you look at the grid, let's say that you have, and Dave, you're familiar with it from watching American football, and that, let's say you have a draft of like your ultimate talent on the grid. Where does Fermin actually place on that? Because obviously a race like this, and like Neil said, some other races so far this year as a rookie, obviously it shows you that he's got a very high ceiling. But if you were a team on the grid or manufacturer, where does he place in your list of priorities for that's the guy I need to have?
Yeah, I mean, like in terms of the NFL, he's like a second or a third rounder. He's not the person that you're going to go out of your way to absolutely make sure. He's not the person you secure first.
Well, that's Marc, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. And then the next time round, when you're looking at who's left, then you would go for. Then Fermin would be very high up there. Also because he's young, he is only 20, so the upside is a lot. There's a lot of potential there. There's a lot more to give. If it's between him and say Frankie Morbidelli, Morbidelli is a lot older. you're thinking, yeah, no, you've got more potential to grow. You've got more potential to learn for Aldeguer. So, yeah, I mean, like he's definitely. I mean, you've got Marc Marquez, and then you've got Pedro Acosta and Fabio Quartararo, and then you've got riders like Pecco Bagnaia. Sort of Pecco Bagnaia. You can argue about whether Bagnaia belongs with Quartararo and Acosta. But then just below that, you've got a whole bunch of riders who are really, really good and who could, break through, get through to that next level. And I think that's where I see him stacking up.
But it kind of brings us into the next part about Fermin as well, Neil, because we had a lot of questions in about the environment that he's in. And Gresini obviously being able to put together a really good team, Alex Marquez and Aldeguer as teammates, but also questions from VJ and Rob about Frankie Carcetti, his crew chief. And VJ was asking just about the level that Frankie's at and why he's not back in a factory team like whenever he was at Suzuki. And then Rob was asking, which I thought was a really good question, and Dave, I'll probably get you to tackle this one. But Neil, you can come in first about Frankie. But Rob was asking that when he was younger, it seemed that the crew chief was much more important. We heard a lot about Jeremy Burgess, Irv Kanemoto, and lots of other crew chiefs that were critical. Whereas now we hear about riders, and it's almost as if the crew chiefs are a little bit overlooked. So, Neil, if you just want to set the scene about the level that Frankie Carcetti has with 4 different winners in MotoGP in the last 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think that speaks for itself, really. Mir, Di Gianantonio, Marc, Fermin now. I mean, that's a fairly impressive record. I have to say, I'm not sure whether that is actually a record. I'm sure if you go through the annals of history, there are other crew chiefs that have won with as many different riders in the Premier class. But certainly in the modern era, I think Frankie is fairly unique in that sense. And a little bit just with what I was saying before, I mean, he always tries to set his bike up with the end of the race in mind. And I think he just has a very solid working method, which is, during pre-season, and he has a new rider in his hands. Let's not get carried away by setting fast lap times. Let's not focus on the leaderboard. Let's just try and do as much work as possible over kind of longer runs on used tires. And I think that has really paid off, so many times in the second half of the season. Fermin's been one of, if not the fastest guy towards the end of the race. And I think Carcetti definitely has a role in that sort of thing. So that kind of stat of winning with 4 riders in the last 5 years is quite crazy.
And I think also about the point about crew chiefs, that has changed as things have got more and more complicated. I mean, it used to be that, Irv Kanemoto was sort of in the garage with his rider and a couple of mechanics, and that would be it. Jerry Burgess came through the school where he was in there with mechanics and maybe an engineer, and that was it. So there was much more actually on the crew chief. The crew chief could do more, and the bikes were making more of a difference. Now, I think you've got the crew chief is much more of a coordinator because there's so many different people. They're talking to the tire guy and the suspension guy and about 5 different engineers. If you go in, if you stand outside of especially a factory garage, there's maybe 5 or 10 people. There's maybe 10 people standing around the rider when they come at the end of their session. If it's a test, then there'll be 20 people standing around, and that, to me, is what has changed most. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there would have been maybe 3 or 4 people standing around, and now it's 2, 3, 4, 5 times as many people.
I think it's one of the things that's quite interesting, just before we move on to our next topic, but it's one of the things that's quite interesting for me about why, from the Superbike paddock, that Top Rack hasn't been able to bring Phil Marin across with him, because the days of Jerry Burgess or crew chiefs in the 2-stroke era having this massive sheet of setup options is long gone. The crew chief's job is to be a project manager. It's to be a coordinator. It's not to make every minute decision. It's to make the final decision.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I was really disappointed that Yamaha didn't bring Phil with Top Rack. And obviously, it also gives a good indication that, considering that when Paolo Bravesio came to Misano to speak to the World Superbike media before he spoke at Mugello to the MotoGP media, he told us Phil's going. It was one of those things that he was excited to see happen. So it showed a pretty good indication. The Pramac are a factory team insofar as they get factory machinery, but it's still their decisions that are being made for personnel. And obviously for Toprak, that means he'll be keeping a Pramac crew chief for next year. But just to move on from Aldeguer and the race win, Neil, this was a crazy weekend. And what was it that made it crazy? Was it the tire choices we had? Was it the circuit? Was it, any other number of factors? Because we saw some massive crashes over the weekend. We saw a lot of mistakes from a lot of riders, and Indonesia's always a bit of a tightrope for everyone.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all of those things that you mentioned, Steve. We had this kind of strange track which really doesn't get used very often. I mean, Lombok isn't the easiest place. Anyone that's been there knows that it's not the easiest place to reach. Also, it's not, I can't imagine there are lots of people on the island of Lombok that are using the track for, track days throughout the year, for example. World Superbike doesn't go there anymore. So in terms of international events, it's quite slim pickings that go there. So it's maybe a little bit like Termas de Rio Hondo in that sense. And then as well as it being dirty, we have some of the highest track temperatures that we have all year. I think the Moto2 race today was in track temperatures of 60 degrees Celsius, which is just insane. Humidity was around 75% today as well. And then you have to add in the fact that Michelin brought their sort of rear tires with a stiffer carcass, which I think they also bring to Thailand, and maybe one other race as well, Red Bull Ring. And
they're different. They're, I mean, I'm going to be a pedant here, but they're slightly different. The tires that they use at Red Bull Ring are slightly different, but the tires that they use here, Mandalika, are the same as at Buriram.
Yeah, so that sort of stiffer carcass really seemed to throw just a lot of the sort of more fancied names off the scent. I mean, the factory Ducati, will come on to them in a little bit, but really played kind of havoc with them, and brought in people like Yamaha. Maybe Yamaha, we know that they're not so dependent on using the rear tire to stop the bike. Everything is on the front end, and the fact that there was no great sort of help from the rear with the sort of the lesser gripping tires, maybe didn't affect them as much as the Ducatis. So yeah, you had this kind of crazy race where Aldeguer was off at the front, and then it was like a Moto3 bike, Moto3 race just behind it with 11 riders all bunched up behind. And I mean, it was a bit of a sight to behold. It was crazy. It was quite fun. It was unpredictable. It was stuff that we haven't really seen in MotoGP so much in the last couple of years. And very, very welcome, I would say.
Dave, just when you look at it as well, Janice asked just a couple of questions. One of them was, why do we race at a track like this whenever we have so many incidents and injured riders?
I mean, we race here because because first of all, Indonesia deserves a race. There needs to be a race there. It's a really interesting layout. It's a good layout. In terms of crashes, there's not really that many more crashes than anywhere else. I think there were 59 crashes over the entire weekend, which is pretty much bog standard. Most rounds there'll be somewhere between 40 and 70 crashes. Maybe there's one or two places. It did look like in the problem at Mandalika is there's a couple of places where you can crash where you're going quite fast, which we see also, for example, at Buriram. There's a couple of corners there where you can crash, but when you crash, you're doing over 200 Ks, and that is the faster you go, the more you're going to hurt. It looks like Marc Marquez and Marco Bezzecchi that crash, that there's a bit of a drop in there's a bit of a drop down to the gravel. This is something we have at a few tracks where the difference between the curbs and the gravel, there's just a little bit of a height difference, and when you drop over that, when you crash, then it's when you start to tumble, and it's the tumbling which really hurts people. That's where people get really injured. So I don't think, I think it's a perfectly safe track. Massimo Rivola, who spoke to journalists after the race, said, no, I mean, it's a safe track. It's just one of those things.
I always think that if this track was in the middle of any European country and it's getting used 200 times a year, it's instantly one of the best layouts that we see.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if it was near, say, if it was near Jakarta, for example, or one of the big cities, it'd be absolutely fantastic. I really, really like the layout, also because it is a little bit different. You are much more on the edge of the tire, much less. There's not so much point and shoot, and it allows for different riding styles.
I think ultimately, though, the biggest problem with it is because it's so dirty, and this was always the problem we had whenever we went there with superbikes as well. It's just so difficult to overtake around there, and that's the biggest challenge. And Neil, that kind of leads us to Dash's question, which is this a good circuit for racing, or is it a little bit too random for having this around?
I mean, it just depends on what you want from your racing. Do you want randomness in your racing? I personally prescribe to that. I like randomness in a season which has been dominated by pretty much one manufacturer and one rider. So yeah, I think it's definitely welcome.
I think that randomness still led to that one manufacturer winning, as Dave said earlier on.
Yeah, and finishing third. Yeah, exactly.
What a disaster for Ducati this one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, also it's just the last 3 races that we've had there in the dry, they've been crazy kind of crash rates. I think we had just 14 finishers in 23, just 12 last year, and then 14 again. So it's always been a place where there's a real high rate of attrition, and you kind of feel like everything's just a little bit on the limit there. The heat is so high; it's so difficult when you're behind other riders with your front tire temperature going up. And it was funny hearing Marc Marquez after the race today saying, like, yeah, it looked cool on the screens back at home, I'm sure, but it was actually just really boring to be in because you were just sat there waiting for something to happen up ahead because you were so on the limit with everything that you couldn't really just pick and pass where you wanted to. So but there was a kind of a moment where we had Luca Marini, Ralph Fernandez, and Alex Rins all fighting for the final step on the podium. And if that was on your bingo card coming into this weekend, then I very much salute you.
Yeah, Fabio Quartararo said, yeah, it wasn't a strange race, it was a strange weekend. And there are all of these different factors that play into it.
I think it's one of those ones as well, just about the crashes. Like you said, Dave, the crash rate wasn't higher, but the rate of spectacular crashes was higher. So it grabs your attention when you see Moto3 riders and Moto2 riders having big high sides, because you don't tend to see it all that often. So I thought that's probably the big reason for the crashes standing out in people's mind. So we might as well get to the biggest crash of the weekend, because Neil, one of the things that we had on patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast for our questions for the show, and the one big burning question for people seemed to be, what the fuck was Bezzecchi doing? Because everyone saw this incident. They see the guy starting from pole, dropping down to 7th into the first corner, and having all that speed all weekend, and it was all over after 5 corners.
Yeah. I mean, I'm asking that question as well, and unfortunately, Bezzecchi wasn't speaking to anyone after the race. He was off to a local hospital just to get checked over and make sure that everything was okay. Obviously, he is now coming off the back of 2 huge crashes in the last couple of rounds after being taken out in the sprint in Motegi. I think he was already, walking wounded here this weekend. Thankfully, he's got no fractures. He's okay, but I imagine he is very, very battered and bruised and feeling secondhand. And yeah, you just have to ask. It was. Clearly there was no malintent there. It was just a sort of error of judgment. But it was something that, he had experienced the previous day. It wasn't as if he had cantered to the victory in the sprint. He really had to fight from back in 8th to come through and win the sprint on Saturday. He found himself in a very, very similar position on the Sunday. And surely he just knew that, okay, if I just play my cards right, like I did the previous day, I'll still have more than enough time to catch up the guys at the front. And yeah, that bad start, I mean, we're still not sure, was that a Bezzecchi problem? Was that an Aprilia problem? It hasn't been an Aprilia problem in the last couple of rounds. This was an Aprilia problem a couple of years ago, but they really seem to have rectified that. So yeah, you're wondering, is that maybe a rider error? Maybe just the pressure, the weight of being such a clear pre-race favourite having a bit of an impact. I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, he's just completely given up what would have been a surefire win. And real open goal with Bagnaia having the weekend that he had, a real open goal to take third in the championship as well. So, yeah, I mean, it's just crazy that it happened the way it did.
Yeah, Neil Hodgson had a really, really good analysis, like breaking down, taking it apart on social media, and that was really good. And what he pointed out was that it wasn't really Bezzecchi wasn't really trying to make a pass or anything. It's just that he was carrying so much more speed and he's so much faster, and he has a slightly different line. He's able to pick the bike up a little bit earlier, but that means that he's going much faster through that section of the track, and it's more that. He ran into the back of Marquez because Marquez was slow, rather than running into the back of Marquez because he was trying to overtake him. It was more sort of like an intersection of racing lines rather than a deliberate attempt to get past him. That doesn't excuse Bezzecchi. Bezzecchi does need to be much more thoughtful about the way that he's riding and approaching this. He needs to think about that. And he was probably being a little bit impatient, exactly as Neil said, because he got terrible start. But I don't think it was malicious. I don't think it was done on purpose. I think it was just all of a sudden because you can see he almost sits up. He almost he's almost caught out by the fact that all of a sudden he's really gaining on Marquez and trying to stop. It's like, he tries to get on the brakes and the bike sits up, and then he hits the back of Marc, and then it's all over.
Yeah, because in that part of the track, he was nearly a quarter of a second faster than everyone.
Yeah.
All the way through the weekend, maybe with the exception of Aldeguer. Aldeguer was able to get within maybe a 10 to 10 and a half, but over the rest of the field, Bezzecchi's advantage in that part of the track was just so absolute. And we saw that in the sprint on the final lap, when he came through those kind of rights and lefts that lead onto the back straight into turn 10. I mean, he was just so much faster than Aldeguer through there. It set him up perfectly for that move into turn 10. But yeah, the fact that he had been surrounded by lots of slower riders on the Saturday. It wasn't as if this was like a completely new situation to him, which kind of makes it a bit more baffling.
Yeah, I think it's just that lack of awareness that for me was the big thing. And ultimately, that's why he's going to get a penalty for Australia without doubt, because it's fine. And Hodgie is correct in what he says, obviously, but you're racing. You're not out there in isolation. It's not a time trial. And it's a massive mistake from him, because on lap one, it's a huge error. And it also gets magnified then as well because it's Marc. If it's another rider, you see the incident and you think, oh, that's a big mistake. But because it's Marc, you're also drawn to that part of it. But from such a bad start, it makes it look really rash on Bezzecchi's part. And ultimately, that's the big weakness for Marco, is to iron out all those kinks, because we know how good he can be. But he'll go to Australia in 2 weeks, Dave, and he'll have his long lap penalties in all likelihood, and his whole weekend is going to be compromised there as well as a result of this mistake.
Yeah, I mean, we won't find out what his penalty will be until he gets there. The same with Jorge Martin, really. We won't find out because Jorge Martin has also got a penalty hanging over his head, but the riders have a right to a hearing, and what the stewards do is they let the riders recover from their injuries, come back, and then interview them about exactly what happened, give them their hearing, let them explain themselves. I do think that even though I don't think it was particularly Bezzecchi's, it wasn't Bezzecchi's fault, but he was the cause of the crash. Like he did actually do it, and he caused the crash. He hit another rider, and that other rider crashed out, and that is pretty much an automatic long lap penalty in most cases. So yes, he's likely to get it.
It's always an interesting one, Dave, because I often say on air that crashes happen. You're right there racing. There are racing incidents, and not every crash deserves a penalty, because sometimes they are just a crash. I think that this one obviously will get a penalty. There's no two ways about it. Same as for Martin in Motegi, you can see a big mistake by a rider, and ultimately those big mistakes, they're the reason to think that you do get punished. But the outcome of them, Neil, shouldn't have a big say in what the penalties are. Marc obviously is injured, will probably miss a couple of rounds after this one.
It might be longer than that.
You wouldn't be too surprised if he sits out the rest of the season with it, like you said, Dave, and he just kind of gives himself time. We'll wait and see what the full recovery is. But ultimately, Neil, the outcome isn't part of what the penalty is. but it's going to be the big talking point now because we're not going to have Marc in Australia.
Yeah, more than likely. Yeah. And the grid does kind of. It is kind of getting down towards the bare bones. There are quite a few riders that are Maverick Vinales potentially out for the rest of the season as well. Martin struggling to get back. He won't be in Phillip Island either. So yeah, we've got some real serious big hitters now that are on the sidelines.
The worry for Marc is because it's a collarbone, and if you depending on where you break the collarbone, it can be the Jorge Lorenzo thing where you're back the next day, or you're out for a long time. It looks like, or from what Marc was telling DAZN, it sounds like he's got some ligament damage, and ligaments do not heal quickly. Ligaments are a massive problem. So I do think he's going to be out for longer. And also, because he said himself, we were sent an audio fragment by Ducati, and he did say, I'm going to come back as quickly as possible within what is possible for the, by the doctors. So the doctors are going to decide. He's going to get medical advice on when it will be safe to return, and he's not going to risk his career, which is a little bit what we saw with Maverick Vinales as well. Maverick is taking the smart decision to sit it out because shoulders take a long time to heal because it's all of that connective tissue which doesn't heal anywhere nearly as quickly, if at all, sometimes as bones and soft tissue.
Just to move it on as well to the full situation for Ducati as well, let's talk about Pecco Bagnaia, because Neil, you mentioned him earlier in the show about, or sorry, it was Dave, you mentioned him earlier in the show about his crash being the moment of the weekend for you. But Neil, when you look at what we saw this weekend for Pecco, just ludicrous how this weekend went for him.
Yeah. Where do we start, really? There's just so much to go through, really. In some ways, this was the biggest story of the weekend, despite the fact that he was absolutely nowhere. As Dave said at the start of the show, he was trying to catch up with Chantra. And we're talking about a guy that got pole position and won both races in Motegi so emphatically just 1 week ago. Ducati were insistent that it was the same package that he had coming from Motegi to Indonesia. It was like his problems from before Misano, but just injected with methamphetamines back to back with steroids and maybe a few little blue pills thrown in for good measure. It was bizarre, really bizarre. And you just got the impression that the mood was kind of set from early in the weekend. Ducati were being so weirdly secretive about
so unnecessarily secretive, Neil.
Yeah, pointlessly so.
Yeah, pointlessly so. Yeah, this has been a bad season for Pecco, but it's still been a good season for Ducati. And there's no point trying to claim otherwise. We can all see with our eyes that Pecco is far from his best this year. So if he used Franco Morbidelli's GP24 at the Misano test, who cares? That shows that they're trying to accommodate the rider. They're going out of their way to try and accommodate the rider and to find exactly what's going on with him and to try and find a solution. The fact that they kept, denying it and making things just seem a lot more cloudy and opaque than they needed to be. Just be transparent about the whole thing. I don't understand. You got the impression that Pecco was getting quite irked by this as well. Like on Friday, he said, "I'm just the rider. I just say what people tell me to say." When he was like, "I'm not going to talk anymore about what spec I'm on." So obviously he's had a good talking to behind the scenes. Then for it to play out as it did on track, I think there was one point in the sprint that he was 3.5 seconds slower than the leaders per lap. As Dave said, he was fighting with Somcat, or he was aiming to get back on an even keel with Somcat Chantra on the Sunday here before binning it. And I don't know if you saw the onboard of his start, which they showed a replay of after the race had finished. It was like the guy's head wasn't even in the game from the very first moment. You could say maybe there was an issue with something on his bike starting the race, but he was so far behind by the first corner. It was like, it was almost as if he had accepted his fate long before the race even got underway. So an absolute nightmare for Pecco, you would say.
Yeah, I went to yesterday. I watched Pecco's race from on board, and then I watched the other Mark's and Alex Marquez's races from on board as well, just to check that there was something weird going on, and there definitely was something weird going on Pecco's bike. The bike was shaking a lot. He also was complaining about not being able to accelerate, and I think that sort of that explains what happened at the start as well. Like he opens the throttle and nothing happens. He said there's just no forward motion at all. And you saw it also from the onboard from the sprint race as well. He'd come out of the corner and open the throttle, and the bikes ahead were just pulling away from him. Whereas if you watched Mark's onboard, if you watch Alex's onboard, the bikes would pull away and then they would catch them again. But Pecco basically just never caught up. So there's something going on. I even went and checked the AE to see which engine he'd used to see if he'd had to use a really, really old engine and that was causing him problems because maybe he'd lost the engine from Motegi, the one that was smoking. He's still has that engine from Motegi. He actually used it during practice, but he was struggling in practice as well. So that's not an explanation. Alex Marquez was saying, look, it's just a strange track. It's just a strange weekend. Sometimes you come here, and that's also what happens over the period of 22 races. Over a season of 22 races, one weekend you'll arrive somewhere and you'll be really, really strong, and then the next weekend you'll go somewhere and you'll be nowhere. You'll be sort of stuck somewhere. So I think the biggest thing with Pecco is that he's been struggling for so long, and then he goes to Motegi and has this absolute transformation. Was just the old Pecco, and then all of a sudden he's back to being lost again. And Fabio Di Giannantonio was speaking after today's race, saying one of our problems is that when we're behind riders, we have massive problems with the front tire. They can't. If you're out in the front leading, as Pecco was, and as Fermin Aldeguer was, then you can manage the tyre really, really well. Then you can manage the bike really well. That's what the bike is designed to do. It's when you're stuck behind other bikes, that's when you get into trouble. That's when you can't get the bike to turn. You can't get the bike to stop, and it just doesn't work as designed.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Alex Marquez made that as well. He said he was in a similar position, actually, coming off the back of Barcelona and Misano, two really good weekends for him, where he won the race in Barcelona, third place at Misano, had a good Misano test, and he shows up in Motegi and he's last in the first session, and then he's last for a lot of the second session, and he's like, what is going on here? And yeah, you just think that it must have been such a massive disappointment for Pecco coming into this weekend. He was saying on Thursday that he really thinks that he's back, and his aim now is to fight for second in the championship with Alex Marquez. I mean, looking back on that comment now, you just sort of think, goodness me, how wrong you were, how innocent and naive you were on Thursday off the Grand Prix here. And Digi was also saying some interesting things. I think it was on Friday. He was saying from one day to the next, without really even touching the bike, he goes from feeling like a world beater to a nobody. And that's something he experienced from Friday to Saturday in Motegi. Had a fantastic Friday, then nowhere in the sprint, nowhere in the main race. He said, the operating window, the setup window for this machine, this GP25, is just so narrow that when you get it right, the bike feels absolutely fantastic. When you don't, and more often than not you don't, then you can have real problems. I think we were saying this on the show either on Friday or Saturday, Dave, one of our Paddock Note shows. But yeah, I mean, Mark, really, I think the struggles of both of those riders puts even more into perspective what Mark has done this year.
Yeah.
That he has just been able to completely ride around that and kind of hide the deficiencies of the GP25.
Yeah, I mean, he's so much better at adapting himself to the circumstances as they change almost day by day rather than just over the weekend. And a quick question for you, Neil. Would you be surprised if Pecco Bagnaia turned up in, say, Phillip Island or more likely Sepang and just blitzed it again? Pole, sprint, win?
Yeah, well, if, Mark isn't there, then I think he'll certainly be starting more of a favourite than if Marc was there. Phillip Island, I would be surprised, to be honest, because it can be a strange track where, you know, if you're not feeling completely comfortable and confident with your package, then you're going to be punished. But yeah, Sepang has always been Pecco's domain, and I would not be surprised at all if Pecco came away from Sepang with 2 wins.
Yeah, I mean, he could leave Sepang with, you know, having done the double, go to Portimao and either be really strong or be just sort of, you know, like nowhere, and then go to Valencia and be lost. There's just, that to me is like the biggest enigma of Pecco Bagnaia is the complete unpredictability.
Neil, we had a question in from TV Room Raccoon, and obviously the Raccoon is our in-house statistician on patreon.com/Paddock Pass Podcast. And when you sign up, you're able to join our Discord channel. And she's asked us the question of, has a title ever been won in more awkward style than this weekend's Dream Team Championship for Ducati?
I can't think of it. It was the heart emoji at the end of the message that did it for me. Yeah, just that was like, I don't even know how to describe it. Yeah, I can't think of any titles won as awkwardly. In fact, you know what, I can. And again, this involves Ducati. It was when they won the Constructors' Championship in 2023 at Aragon, and Enea Bastianini on a Gresini bike had just, in fact, it was 2022, sorry, Pecco was going for the title with Fabio, and Bastianini had beaten Pecco on a year-old Gresini bike, and all of the Ducati management were standing in the garage looking really pissed off afterwards, and a little icon came up saying, you know, Ducati, Constructor World Champion in MotoGP yet again. So yeah, I think that is one that maybe equals it.
This is from memory, so I need to check. But if I remember,
that's always a risk for you.
Yeah, it certainly is at my age. You know, like not being able to remember what I had for tea this morning. 2010, Jorge Lorenzo. I think he won the championship in Sepang, and I think that was like the first time. It was Valentino Rossi won that race, and it was the first time he'd won in a while because he was still struggling with his shoulder with a shoulder injury, and. I remember talking to Wilco Zeelenberg after it, and Zeelenberg was quite pissed off about it because, you know, Rossi had come in and made a big song and dance about, look, you know, because also it was a statistically, it might have been his 46th win for Yamaha or something like that. It was a numerically interesting number, but yeah, that again was a little bit awkward because, you know, Rossi, speaking of dominating your teammate, Rossi came in, made sure that it was all about him while it was Jorge Lorenzo celebrating his first MotoGP championship.
And need we mention COF 2015 COF?
Yes, exactly. Yes, less said about that, the better.
No need to mention that at all. Obviously, one of the other things that I found interesting as well was when Ducati Lenovo's press release came out. It talks about Fermin Aldeguer winning the race, Gresini being the top independent, and then it goes into mention about how disastrous the weekend was for Pecco and Marc. But just to move on to the hire and fire section then as well, we've obviously been downcast on Ducati over the last few minutes, so we might as well be positive now. And we'll go with the hiring section. So, Neil, who are you hiring?
I'm hiring Jose Antonio Rueda, the new Moto3 World Champion for 2025, who wrapped up the championship in fine style this year. I mean, it was a messy end to the Moto3 race with an ugly crash for David Munoz. It looks as though he's a broken leg. He's going to be out for some time. We also had, I think, Adrian Fernandez finishing ahead, but then was given a penalty. Max Quiles was on the podium, had to get out of the Parc Ferme because he was given a penalty post-race. But even that couldn't really detract from what a brilliant year it's been for Jose Antonio Rueda. 9 wins, 13 podiums, only out of the top 5 twice all season, and one of those times was a mechanical, so out of his control. I think there was only one round when he didn't lead the championship, which was after Qatar, where he had suffered that mechanical. And yeah, he's been comfortably the fastest guy in the class this year. I think his ability on softer tires and his ability to manage those tires over longer distances is something that just really amazes some of his rivals. I seem to remember Joe Kelso struggling to stay with him with Angel Piqueras in Jerez when Rueda was on a softer tire, and they were thinking, okay, towards the end of this race, Rueda's going to drop off and going to lose time. And in fact, he just kept getting faster and pulling away from them, and they were just completely baffled as to how he was doing it. And his big weakness coming into this season had always been his lack of ruthlessness. He was probably one of the fastest guys last year, but just was not set up to deal well with the kind of inevitable Moto3 brawls that you have. And he's been completely transformed this year. He came from back of the grid to win in Silverstone, obviously. He had that brilliant last lap pass on Max Quiles at Misano to win there. There's just been countless examples where Rueda has shown that he's been willing to roll his sleeves up this year, and that's been probably the biggest step forward that he's made. So yeah, well-deserving Moto3 champ for this season.
Yeah, great shout on that, Neil. And Dave, what about you? Who are you hiring?
I'm hiring Pedro Acosta because of that defensive ride today. Like, he knew that he had to wait for his front tire to come to him, and he kept basically the entire field except for Fermin Aldeguer behind him for 10, 15 laps. He was so impressive in every single corner. He was also obviously half a second slower than everyone else, and yet no one could get past, no matter how they tried. I think Massimo Rivola criticised Raul Fernandez for not being able to get past him, for not trying something. But it was just brilliant by Acosta. It was a really impressive display, and it's also a sign of quite a complete rider to be able to ride not just sort of in an attacking mode, in an aggressive mode, but also to be able to ride defensively and manage all of the riders behind you. A little bit reminiscent of Andrea Dovizioso in his prime when he was running those races in Barcelona, where he's managing his tires, slowing the field up, keeping everyone behind him, and then sort of saving himself for the end of the race. It was very reminiscent of that, and it was just a really, really impressive performance.
I saw a wry smile from Neil Morrison's face there at the sheer mention of a modern-day Andrea Dovizioso.
Yeah, no, fully agreed. Just thought it was amazing from Acosta. And the crazy thing was, like, his race was, I think, 9 seconds slower than last year. And, Marini was saying that that Acosta ran the medium front tire. Most people run the soft. Acosta said we can't run that tire with the KTM, but Marini was saying he probably picked that tire specifically because he had that kind of race in mind, because he knows that the KTM's acceleration is super strong, so he accelerates strong, he brakes super late, and therefore becomes incredibly difficult to pass. But yeah, I thought it was just the kind of strength of will as well to do that.
Yeah.
It was just he wanted that position more than the riders behind him, and you have to kind of commend him for that.
And the concentration is to be able to do it all race long. That was, it was really impressive to be able to manage that kind of intensity, like all race long.
I think that's all very fair points. I think for me, in my hire, I think if I was a MotoGP team manager, I'd be hiring Pecco Bagnaia right now, because you're getting him for pennies on the pound. But
go free, go completely free.
Go completely free, ride for bonus money next year. But
well, it works out for one rider.
It certainly did. I think for me, I liked Brad Binder at the end of that race.
Yeah,
I really thought Binder was coming through to get the podium, and I think that would have been a really great story if he had done that. But I'll go with Binder for his performance, because for Aldeguer, we've already talked about him at the top of the show how impressive he was, and if someone's impressive, there's also the other side of the coin. And Dave, I'll come to you first for this one. Who are you firing this weekend?
I am firing Davide Tardozzi, because he took a delicate situation and made it a million times worse by Streisand affecting the thing into the moon.
I did find this really interesting, actually, in paddock notes, whenever you decided to bring in the Barbara Streisand effect.
Yeah, yes, exactly. The go Google Streisand effect. Basically, it's when you want to keep something out of the headlines, and then you keep bringing it up, and by bringing it up, or by all of your efforts to try to suppress the information, it comes out. And like, Tardozzi did not want people talking about what bike Pecco Bagnaia was on, and he put so much effort into it that everyone was talking about what bike Pecco Bagnaia was on, and it's completely pointless. There would have been there's a much there would have been a much easier solution. I always think that Brad Binder is brilliant at deflecting any technical questions, because to anything at all, I mean, also because he does have quite a good technical understanding. It's just that he has absolutely zero interest in talking to journalists really about anything, but especially about the technical aspects of his bike. And he'll just sort of like, I don't know, bud, I'll just ride the thing. And that's all of the technical detail that you are going to get out of it. It's slightly less annoying than Marc Marquez's. We tried some things and we tried some other things, and then we had some negatives, some positives and some negatives. But yeah, the way that the whole thing was handled, it could have been dismissed fairly quickly if he just pretended to give people a little bit of information. But because he was trying his best not to give people information, it sent people digging, and it completely backfired.
It's interesting, Dave, because I'm doubling down on Ducati and their PR disaster throughout the weekend, because you could literally pick anything of about 5 different topics this weekend for how Ducati mishandles situations. So I'll go with Ducati's PR team for mine. And Neil, what about you? Who's your in the firing line for Neil Morrison?
Well, I'm tempted to go for Luca Marini. As much as I like Luca,
how very dare you?
He had the second best bike today, and he should have finished second. But he was just not enough of a bastard to really stick it on Pedro Acosta in the opening laps. And he ended up getting done by Raul Fernandez, and then suddenly he finds himself back in 8th. And we saw in the closing laps, when he was able to pass a couple of riders ahead of him, just how much faster he was than those riders. So Marini, that was a real missed opportunity, I think, for a podium there. And you just compare that performance to Marc Marquez in the sprint in Motegi, where he put one on Mir and basically ran them both out to the very edge of the track, right on the limit of what is legal. But he had to get it done. That was the only way he could do it, and he did it. And Marini didn't quite get that done. But I'm not actually going to go for Luca Marini, despite all of that. I'm going to go with Manu Gonzalez's team, because he was disqualified after the Moto2 race after finishing second for using non-homologated software. And he is now looking at just a 9-point championship advantage going into the final 4 races of the season, when it would have been a 29-point advantage over Diogo Moreira, who is in better form than him. And suddenly it doesn't really look like such a sure thing for Manu Gas to win this year's Moto2 championship. And although you could say that this is something out of his control, I have noticed in the last couple of weekends how there have been several weekends where Manu has been the fastest guy, and you're going into the Sunday thinking he's a surefire to win, and it just hasn't quite worked out. And you could say there's, luck has gotten in the way. Like you could say luck got in the way in Austria when his radiator got punctured, and he had to retire from that. But his radiator, I think, that is maybe a consequence of like the bad start that he got in that particular race. Japan, he should have won that one as well, but had a bad start, ended up taking out Celestino Vietti, had to do a long lap penalty, only managed 5th. And this was another race weekend where he had been so much faster than Moreira all weekend long. Yet just wasn't able to maximize that. And that's before he gets disqualified. So, he suddenly finds himself in quite a precarious place at the top of the Moto2 Championship. And thank goodness it looks as though we will actually have one World Championship that will be going the distance, because I was in slight fear that we'd be heading to Portimao and to Valencia for a while with nothing really left to play for. So it looks as though Moto2 at least will give us something to shout about up until the end.
The Moto2 thing, or Gonzalez thing, is quite interesting, because if I read the penalty correctly, it said it was basically an outdated version of the software that they were running. Usually what happens is someone runs into the storeroom, picks up an ECU, because the ECU that they had on the bike, which had, which had either been crashed or damaged, or it wasn't working. They wire it in, and they didn't check the version of the software that was running. So sort of that's my working theory, that someone just grabbed an ECU and didn't check it thoroughly enough to make sure it had the correct version of software running on it. They made an assumption, and that's what caught him out. And it's an awful way to actually be disqualified, to lose your position and lose your points. But at this level, you need to be on top of all of those details.
Yeah, it's a funny one, because very rarely, like you said, David, is there anything malicious in it. but the impact is huge.
Yeah.
And definitely it's something that's going to give us a good championship battle all the way through to the end of the season. And that kind of brings us into the big championship battle coming into the final 4 rounds of the year. Neil Morrison, you're trailing me in the Alpine Stars Fantasy League. Now,
But making progress.
You are making progress. I do not know how I only gave up 7 points to you this weekend, because I don't think any of my riders scored points. I was lucky that I put Acosta in. I couldn't afford to put Aldeguer in, so I managed to get Pedro in, and thank goodness for that, because I would have been in big trouble otherwise. But Neil, I'm in. We've got 3,500 players in the league this year, so it's probably worth mentioning that Adam is in the 66th percentile. So Adam is Adam's pretty terrible, but at least he's figured out that it's worth having, good riders as your gold riders rather than, some of the riders he had earlier in the season. David, you are 1,300 places ahead of Adam Wheeler. So you are flying high, just on the cusp of the top 1,000. So that's great going. And Neil, you're in the top 1 percentile. So you are doing a really good job. 313th place. And there's about 65 points between the two of us. So it's going to go right down to the wire. And a little bit like in Moto 2, is it going to be the guy that's led the championship for much of the year that's going to get the win? Or are you going for the dark horse coming up the outside?
On the one hand, Neil has still got a boost left, but on the other hand, the person, the
Mark's
rider
not going to be there.
Yeah, exactly. The rider you would have used your boost on would have been Marc Marquez.
Exactly. I'm not going to reveal any tactics going into these final 4 races. It's all a secret.
Oh God, have you been talking to Tardozzi?
Yeah, the more you try and hide it, Neil, the more everyone's going to talk about it. But it has been a really good year in the Fantasy League this year because, as I said, we've had 3,500 players this year, which is, again, an increase on the last few years. There's a lot of interest in it, and it's good to be able to see, again, on the Discord channel, just how many of our patrons are playing it and how many of them are taking a big interest in it as well. So definitely worth checking that out. And as ever, it's worth checking out patreon.com/Paddock Pass Podcast, because for all of the Grand Prix weekends, we have our Paddock Notes shows, which is a daily roundup show, usually about 20-25 minutes, just to get everyone up to date with what we're hearing at the debriefs, what is being said within the paddock, and then a bit of analysis for the day as well. On Patreon, we also do this show for World Superbike weekends. We tend to do that on either the Thursday or the Friday just to preview the weekend. And then our normal roundup shows from a World SBK weekend as well. So on Patreon, Neil, we always have lots of additional content as well, lots of interviews and a few different features. So it's always worth keeping an eye on the Patreon channel. Bring us to a close for our Indonesian Grand Prix review. Dave, what's your grade for the weekend?
My grade for the weekend is a 9 because it was enormous fun. It was just really stupid and random and great.
Yeah, I can't argue with that because we had pretty much the best sprint that we've had all the way through the season as well. Neil, what about you?
Yeah, I'll concur. 9 for me as well, just because it was so random, so unpredictable. Yeah, one of the weirdest weekends in recent MotoGP history that I can think of. Maybe the weirdest MotoGP weekend, and by weird I mean like the highest number of like that season's top riders just having an absolute stinker and disappearing or not being present really at the front. Maybe since like the final race of 2020, that Portimao, that first ever Portimao MotoGP race that we had, where Oliveira won, and then we had, I think, Miller and Morbidelli in second and third, and the likes of Mir, Rins, Quartararo, the big hitters that year just were absolutely shocking, had real stinkers. It kind of reminded me a little bit of that. Just, MotoGP turned upside down. As I said previously, Ralph Fernandez, Alex Rins, and Luca Marini all fighting for the podium. I mean, what's not to love in some respects?
Yeah, I think at one stage we had like all riders in the top 6 hadn't been a race winner. And you've everyone chasing it down, which was pretty cool. So yeah, for me as well, yeah, it was a great weekend all in. Obviously, we've got a weekend off before we go to Australia. And Neil, you'll be back in the paddock for that one as well.
I will, yeah. Setting forth out to Asia on Wednesday, a few days in Singapore, then heading over to Oz after that. So yeah, it should be nice to get back into the paddock. Final 4 rounds, Phillip Island. I mean, what's not to love?
Yeah, I'm looking
The
forward to
rain,
Phillip Island.
the wind,
The rain.
the cold, the scorching sun, the sunburn. But apart from that, it's
snakes.
great.
The
Yeah, the
snakes.
snakes. Yeah, exactly.
Snakes aren't too bad this time of year. It's a bit cold for them down there.
Yeah. You're right, Dave. It's such a crap run to be at. And you can speak from a position of experience as well.
Exactly.
Of course.
Yeah. No, from my long experience of traveling to.
I can
Phillip Island.
firmly speak from experience, and I can say that it's so much nicer when we go there in February. Because I remember when World Superbikes went back there for the last race of the season in, what was it, like 21 or 22, something like that. And suddenly I had the grim reminder of just how crap Phillip Island can be at this time of year for weather. But we still always end up with a great race, so I'm looking forward to that one. Obviously, next week I'll be in Jerez, so myself, Gordo, and hopefully Evo as well will be able to get everyone up to speed on what's happening in World Superbikes on Thursday evenings. Check that out on patreon.com/Paddock Pass Podcast. As ever, a big thank you to Renthal Street for supporting the podcast. Check out renthal.com and see all the parts that you can fit for your bike, and also polepositiontravel.com. Check them out as well for their packages for Grand Prix weekends. They've got a good sale on at the moment for the Valencia Grand Prix and the final round of the season. So check that out on Pole Position Travel.